right, good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Abner from the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. Welcome to the first session of the 2023 Kayak Conference. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Daniela DiGiacomo and Connor Flick from the University of Kentucky. They're here to talk about relational equity by design. So now I pass it over to our presenters. Thank you much.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. As I mentioned to Lauren, I am outside because there's some loudness going on inside the house today. So here I am. So please let me know if that's an issue, and I can also turn off the video, and Connor can always take over. So I am Dr. Daniela Kruel. I am a professor in the School of Information Science at UK, and I'll talk a little bit more about my role, but I'm here today co-presenting with Connor Flick, and he will introduce himself in a little bit. And we are going to be talking about insights from a recent sort of mini project we did as part of our larger work together. What we're going to talk about over the next 30 minutes, I just want to make sure that when I clicked that slide, does everyone now see slide 2?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, great. This is my first time using Collaborate. So what we're going to talk about over the next 30 minutes is the sort of how-tos of creating and sustaining intergenerational partnerships among young people and adults. Just to foreshadow, we'll introduce ourselves and our institutional and organizational roles and our connection to each other, because that'll highlight and sort of embody a lot of what we're talking about. We will talk about our guiding assumptions in our work together, and then we'll talk through the how-tos of healthy youth-adult partnerships or intergenerational partnerships, and we'll sort of use those terms interchangeably. And we will hope that this dog stops barking.
And I will take over from here. So hi, everyone. My name is Connor Flick. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a sophomore at Brown University. I'm a board member at the Kentucky Student Voice team. I'll get more into that here in a bit, but I really want to jump into what the Kentucky Student Voice team is and what we're all about, just that way everyone kind of has a basis of what we're working off of here. So before I really dig into myself and Danielle and the work that we've done, it's more important to talk about who we are as a collective. So who we are is we're 100 plus self-selected students from across Kentucky. So what we mean within that statement of who we are is that we are students that come from all walks of life, all types of backgrounds, from all counties in Kentucky. So when we really look at self-selection, what we're saying with that is that we don't have an application process, we don't have fee structure or membership structure in the strict sense. What we're really about is making sure that students that have the passion and really want to make change in their communities and in their schools have the ability and the time and the energy and the support and resources to be able to do that. So as you can see here, there's a bit of an older picture of us doing an in-person meetup. We work mostly virtually, as we're doing right now, but every now and again we are able to see each other in person. So as we move forward, it's helpful to keep in mind that we also have some adult partners on our team that we love to work with. And on top of that, we are very much distributed across Kentucky and, as of currently, the nation. As we move forward, I really want to talk about our mission statement and what we are really all about once we start getting into the nut graph of how we talk about ourselves. So I'm going to read this off directly because I think it's super powerful and super important. So we are young people co-creating more just, democratic Kentucky schools and communities as research, policy, and storytelling partners. Working backwards, we believe that we're partners in our own communities and partners with adults in our communities. So we're really trying to foster healthy youth-adult partnerships and intergenerational partnerships, as Danielle was alluding to. We work on research, policy, and storytelling. So we're in the state capitol, we're in news outlets, we're in research spaces, really trying to make sure that we're distributing as much of our work as possible, and we're elevating youth voice in as many places and powerful areas as we physically can. We're really about our schools and our communities. Our work doesn't stop within education because we understand that students live a whole life outside the school. And so we want to support students wherever they are, and that includes both their schools and their communities. We believe in making those schools and communities just and democratic within Kentucky. So we really want to make sure that we're making a playing field that is correct for the different students that are within it, and that we're responding with our schools and our communities in ways that fit students' needs and elevate them to be the best that they can be. And our co-creation comes back to the same thing that we are saying with partners, and that we're trying to be intergenerational as we move forward in the work that we do. So as we move forward, we're going to be talking a lot about student voice and intergenerational partnerships and how those things interplay. But I think people have a very strong conception of what student voice is without necessarily defining what that term means to them. So at the Kentucky Student Voice team, we've spent a lot of time trying to think about how we understand student voice and what it means in our own communities. So at the bottom rung here, we can see that we consider the smallest form of student voice to be expression. This is showing up to a protest, showing up to different events, such as a school board meeting, and taking the mic. It's the same types of pathways that we already built out for our own communities to express themselves in very public and non-standard ways that aren't strictly defined within the institutional structures that we have. So in essence, expression is student voice without any sort of partnership in trying to create student voice. Consultation is the next rung up, where we do start seeing that partnership. Adults are really talking to students about what they need and what can happen, but there's no interplay within that. There's no feedback loop that happens. As we move up into presence and partnership, we start to see a more stable role for students. They're consistently being consulted, and there is an ongoing conversation between adults and students about what can happen to really make sure that they're being responded to when they express their needs. However, that presence part of it makes it that way. Oftentimes, they're more of a declaration on the school board that they may sit on, or the community engagement committee that they're serving within. Partnership really expresses that when they're on those boards, when they're in those spaces, they move up and into a place of actual leadership, and they're really moving forward to create change within their communities for themselves. We also see activism and leadership as the highest rung, where students are not only changing their communities, but they're the ones to do it. They're the ones moving forward and creating in a way that nobody else in their community can, and they're pulling on their own specific skills to really develop out what's possible for everyone in their schools and their communities. So what we really do is we try to amplify and elevate student voice, support students as partners to improve Kentucky schools, and build power to co-create more just and democratic schools and communities. Those are the three pillars that drive our work day to day, and that's going to show out as we share some of the results and the methodology from the study that we did. So how we amplify and elevate is pretty straightforward. We write books, we get into news outlets, we show up on the Capitol steps, we come into schools and talk to students directly through our roundtables. We show up to legislators' offices, and we show up within the legislature to make sure that they can hear us as we present the findings of some of the work that we do in our research, policy, and advocacy work. And so when we move forward with that, keep in mind that we're really trying to make sure that the research and the work that we do is operating on the highest levels that we can within our own communities, but also within the lowest levels that we have within our own communities, working out those grassroots by talking to individual students, but talking to the people that can affect the most change at the same time. And that includes both students and the legislatures that are defining big statewide issues. So I want to talk a little bit about myself as we move forward from understanding what KSVT is into some of our work. So for myself, I joined KSVT back in the pandemic, right in May 2020. We launched our Coping with COVID-19 YPAR study, which was a massive study that included a collaboration between myself and Daniela, which is where we first met, where we collected 13,000 responses from across the state of Kentucky, including all 120 counties, along with 50 different student-to-student interviews, where we collected so much rich and critical data that really helped Kentucky legislators understand what the current state of students were as they tried to navigate the pandemic and make important and critical and timely policy decisions moving forward into 2021. We also had continued partnerships and research, and I was able to help turn some of that research into policy, which landed me the highest spot that I can have within KSVT as the cross-organizational coordinator, really trying to make sure that our team could navigate those areas of research, policy, and advocacy as one unit, and really understanding how we can bridge those different gaps to make sure that people understood what the research we were doing was and how we could turn our research into policy. After that, I graduated high school and went off to Brown University, which is where I am right now. And now I'm a board member and cheerleader for the entire team. So I'm super excited to talk more about KSVT and some of the work that we've done with you today. And I will hand it back to Daniela.
Thanks so much, Connor. I really appreciate that and you taking the time to come in today and talk about this. As hopefully, and I'm sorry about my Wi-Fi issues that went in and out, but we wanted to start today with Connor introducing himself and a little bit about the Kentucky Student Voice Team, because part of when we thought about responding to this call to be here today in front of all of you who work with children and youth in library settings, I've been lucky in the last 5 years since I moved to Kentucky and started the position in the library science school to be an adult research ally for the student voice team. And so I've known and worked with Connor for the last 5 years, along with the other couple hundred students across the state that at any given time are part of the Student Voice organization. And as he said, the organization tackles issues that they're interested in. And so as an adult partner for them, they call us, there's a few of us, and we're adult allies for them as young people in pursuing their interests. And so when I had spoken with Amy Olson and others about what might be interesting today, we talked about the idea of sharing out some findings from a recent sort of study on ourselves that we did around this issue of what makes a good youth-adult partnership in different settings. And so just a little bit about myself. I teach in the MSLS program at UK and in the ICT program. So I teach classes like informal learning and information organizations, one that I designed. One of our core courses, Information in Society, and Information Literacy and Critical Thinking. That's an undergraduate class I teach here at UK. And broadly speaking, my research interests are youth learning and development. So UK hired me on in the library school in particular to focus on teaching classes in youth, children and youth services and youth learning. And I focus a lot of my work on how to improve and study civic engagement and community-based learning opportunities for young people. So I just want to pause here really quick. I told Lauren this at the beginning, but Connor and I are both really okay with any clarifying questions and questions along the way. So I just want to make space for that. I can't see you all. I can just see myself, Connor, and the thing. So I know we have about 7 participants, but please, if you have any questions, I just want to name that, please go ahead and just speak up. No problem at all. So our guiding assumptions in this, and it's always hard to know where to place this in the presentation slides, but Connor and I both believe in this work and in our work together that, and why we're talking about this today, that healthy, supportive, and caring youth-adult partnerships or intergenerational relationships, there's various ways to call them, are essential in the design of all equity-oriented learning environments, formal or informal. So in school, or which is a lot of where we work also, but also in informal settings like libraries, museums, after-school programs. So the healthy youth partnership is critical. And I think, I'm guessing that if we were in a room together, I see many nodding heads. And secondarily, that all young people, regardless of background or upbringing, anything, deserve the right to participate in healthy, supportive, and equitable learning environments. And so a lot of our work is really just making visible or lifting up, how do we construct those type of partnerships? And so what brings us here today is that, with the Student Voice Team and me as an adult research ally and university partner, as I mentioned, I support the Student Voice Team in doing the work they want to do. But one thing that recently came up was that we got invited to participate in a journal's special issue call. So this is the journal called Childhood, a Journal of Global Child Research. And its special issue was focusing on deepening collaborative research through relations of production, context, and meaning making. And particularly a special issue that asked intergenerational collaborations to speak about how they do their work. So it was a really process-oriented call. So it was funny because I came to Connor and the team and I said, hey, I got this invitation for a call. Would we be interested in sort of lifting up the invisible of our work a little bit? And answering the question in the form of a paper, which we don't usually do, what makes a healthy intergenerational youth-adult partnership? So that's the question we answered, and the methods we took to do that, and this is pretty typical for the work the Student Voice Team does, is they, with my support, designed a focus group protocol, so a set of questions that asked about the inner workings of our process together. And so they led a focus group, 6 current and former Kentucky Student Voice team members. So these, again, are folks in middle and high school and sometimes in college and beyond who are still affiliated with the group. And we asked, or they asked each other questions about their experiences with youth adult partnerships. So it's a meta. And so we have the data from that focus group, and we have also just our collective reflections over the several years of working together. And together, the young people and me wrote this scholarly paper that is now under review with this journal and has been informally accepted and is going through blind peer review process now. So that is, we would love to share that, hopefully when it gets published, if you're interested. It should be open access. But that's what we're going to talk about today, is the findings from that sort of small study on our process. So again, I just want to take 1 second to sort of see if there's any questions coming up, and I'll look in the chat myself. But all right. So the findings, how-tos. So these are basically what the young people said about what, childhood studies. So I'll type that in, or childhood, a global journal. Well, I'll type that in a second when I go back, but childhood, a global journal of international research, I believe. So these are the findings from what the young people said were the most important elements of a good youth adult partnership. And I will say, we go sort of interchangeable when using the terms like healthy or robust or good. Again, our guiding assumptions is that in places like after school programs in library settings or in public libraries or school libraries, a lot of what makes those settings inviting and successful and sustainable over time is the presence of youth adult partnerships in some form, right? I understand that young people aren't necessarily the ones running public libraries, right? We're not proceeding with that assumption or running schools, but we are proceeding with the assumption that the most sort of democratic or equity-focused, equity-minded areas are those that, as Connor mentioned in that like spectrum of student voice, that include more than just students as sort of expressing their feelings, but actually being a part of the central design. And for that, we think that takes healthy adult youth relationships. Okay. So the first dimension, there were 3 dimensions that really came up as the most powerful. And this is a bit of us presenting our framework. So I'm going to talk through some of this and also just probably give you a chance to read some of the quotes. But the first thing that came up was the fact that in order to be involved, or what makes young people feel like they are involved in a healthy partnership or relationship with an adult, is when there is some balancing of power. And so we're talking about power from a Foucault sense, right? Like the power, the ability to exercise agency and make choices. So our analysis of data that suggested that the importance of negotiating power and responsibility and naming that was key to this. So what some young people said is that it's not exactly about taking 50% of the responsibilities, right? Adults do come with a lot of varying levels and more levels of potential experience in some areas quantitatively. And that's not to say that young people don't also come with that. So it's not necessarily that it's a distribution of power in a 50-50 way, but that, as Erica described, working together on every step and having youth get to determine how much they support and want from adults and can set boundaries. So building a space that allows us grace when we make mistakes or don't get it exactly right. According to Cleo, another student, they said, the adult ally I work with, I don't really view her as an adult, not in a way that's lessening her power or anything, but more that we just work so well together. And when it's really successful, you don't have to think of the labels like, oh, you're an adult and I'm a student. You just think of it more as a partnership. And Amber further displayed the importance of the invisible and visible mindfulness from adult partners, saying, often adults don't realize that they can speak so much and unknowingly prevent young people from being able to share their imaginations, hopes, ideas, and technical thoughts. And so on a really practical level, as someone who's worked with and in youth organizations or youth spaces, youth-dominated spaces for the last 20 years, Um, I've come to realize how important it is to talk about power dynamics in to name them visibly. And so when, for example, working with a teen advisory council or young people in a setting around how to design a space or a program, um, saying that I understand that you think I have more expertise or power on this because I'm the adult, but actually I really want to hear your perspectives because you're closest to this. So what are your interests? What drives you to want to come to for a museum or a library and that? And giving actual space for that and naming the power dynamics. Or, maybe you think I have more experience or expertise on this because I have a degree. Well, that's not necessarily the case, right? So being comfortable as an adult to name that and trying to purposefully shift the normative power assumptions and hierarchies that lie in educational spaces in and out of schools or libraries is a helpful tool in getting young people to understand and to enact the voice that they have. A second part of what came up in the analysis of our data was, again, building off this first dimension, but it takes vulnerability on the part of both parties, the adults and the young people, to make each other feel comfortable enough to provide meaningful and constructive feedback about the process. And so, the idea, just like as adults, we learn best when we get feedback on our work and our process, right? And so I imagine a lot of you in the room work in settings where hopefully it's a space of collaboration and generative feedback where that sort of invitations for constructive feedback are welcome. But you all know probably that takes vulnerability. That takes recognizing that we all make mistakes and being open about where we are in our sort of ideas and sense making in our lives in a particular moment. So a lot of the young people named that part of what makes them feel safe to express their feelings is having that vulnerability and the shared trust on the part of the adult and the youth. Another quote that shows this is exactly that. There needs to be a degree of vulnerability between the adult and the youth because both have to be willing to admit when they screw up, because you are working outside of the traditional power dynamic when you're trying to create these healthy partnerships, right? Being able to own up and improve it after the facts, that's really what defines it. And then the third dimension, and then I'll switch it back to Connor, is that being able to, COVID has brought this on us whether we like it or not, but recognizing that adults and young people have different routines, different work schedules, different times that they sleep, different times that they eat. And so when you're thinking about creating, if you really want, for example, to have a youth advisory board or a council in your child section or to be working with young people, you have to think about being flexible as adults and young people to adapt to different people's processes in place. So this idea of flexible adaptation really came up. Thinking about, what Jenny said, and we're talking here about research, but she says, I don't know that the typical research structures were built with the average student or young person in mind. They were built with adult careers in mind. And so sometimes you have to step outside and be like, how do I step outside this method through maybe Slack or Twitter to find people who aren't involved in these circles but who might have a lot of expertise to bring. So we joke on our team about the fact that, what this means on a day-to-day basis is a lot of the work that we do together as a youth organization happens between 5 and 10 p.m., right? Because that's when the young people are available, because after school they have jobs, they're taking care of their family, they have sports, they have after-school clubs. That's not typical for adults, right? At 5 o'clock, I'm home with my daughter trying to give her dinner, bath, all these things. And so we've had to learn to adapt to each other and be open and visible and sort of malleable to that. Sometimes the communications are going to take place on Slack, on text, on video off, on video on, at a coffee shop, but the young people named that the fact that when they find adults that are willing to flexibly adapt to their routines and vice versa, that's part of what makes healthy adult-youth relationship and a partnership. And these are sort of the mundane minutiae, right, of these everyday work routines, but it came out as a central finding that what helps cultivate that trust. So now I'll pass it back to Connor, and he'll talk through some of the challenges and limitations of this work, and implications for moving forward.
Thank you so much, Daniela. You did an amazing job at introducing all of those findings and all of those dimensions and speaking to all of them. As we kind of talk about these challenges and limitations, this is something where I want to express how much of this process and how much of the project was something that was self-reflective for Kentucky Student Police Team. We were really trying to understand our process and try to figure out how we can express this and model this for other organizations, and take some of the core working ideas that we do naturally on a day-to-day basis and really try to put words and thoughts and meaning to them in a way that we can express to communities like yourselves, to start to implement and really understand how we can take this model and move forward. So as is the case for all KSVT projects, the young people that demonstrate interest in joining this project, including the reflective conversations, organizing this focus group, the data analysis, and writing a protocol, all parts of this are not 100% reflective of the entire Kentucky Student Voice Team, nor is young people as a whole. There are 630,000 students in Kentucky, and we have 100 students on our team at any given time. So the 6 that we were able to tap for this focus group will not be a 100% clear view of what's happening within our team on a day-to-day basis, nor will be even remotely a clear view of the thoughts and feelings of young people all across the state of Kentucky or within the United States or internationally. We're not having a conversation about what's possible for the entire state, but more so what's possible as we move forward and as we try to build out organizational models and think through some of the things and the guiding principles that can create these healthy youth-adult partnerships. We also acknowledge that we could have moved forward with a parallel adult-only focus group that wasn't conducted within the Kentucky Student Voice Team because we have these adult allies and partners as we do with our youth. But our data and findings speak more to the thoughts and feelings of collaborative research and intergenerational partnerships brought forward by the youth. We think that a lot of youth participatory action research and youth-adult partnerships are still dominated by the adults in the room in many, many cases. And so we felt it best to really center and focus on the youth perspective in this, because that is something that is unrepresented in the research and how we move forward with these partnerships. It's so often adults speaking up on behalf of youth for these partnerships, and we really want to try to flip that script to make it sure that it's youth that are having their voices and needs, thoughts, and feelings centered, and that it is an adult speaking over youth, even in the form of authorship and in a paper. So as we look forward, some of our future directions is that we really want to emphasize that collaborative youth-led research does not mean the absence of adult involvement, but rather the willingness of involved adults to be aware of when to intentionally step back and let students drive the conversation. As Daniela said, it's not a 50-50 split. We're really looking towards making sure that everyone has the just supports that they need to do the great work that they're able to do. This is a developing process, and so sometimes someone with more expertise and with more knowledge and with more lived experience will be the one speaking up, but that may be an adult or a student, and acknowledging when it's time for individuals to step back in that organization and in that group will make sure that we can have that healthy partnership and really understand how to move forward in that way. And so when youth researchers and youth advocates are surrounded by adults in this way, and the adults in the room are willing to assist without dictating, these power dynamics are more responsive, attentive, and relevant for the population that the research is intended to serve. And so when adults aren't dictating on to students, this is the research question we're going to do, these are the methodologies that we're going to work with, or here's how we're going to run this organization, and here's how I'm going to meet you. Rather, responding to the students' needs and making sure that there's an ongoing feedback loop and conversation for that actually make sure that the work that we're trying to do serves the people that we're trying to serve within it. We don't do work without people, without talking to them first. And so we really want to push forward for this responsiveness in this way. And so we really want to underscore that by encouraging you to pursue and drive research, there's really an unlearning that happens when we consider the socially constructed hierarchies that they're subject to in so many academic, educational, and social spheres, which allows them throughout their lives to really unlearn more structures that we think can be very problematic throughout their adult lives. What we really mean by this is that so much of academic spaces focuses on credentialism, about learned helplessness, and really making sure that students step back. And what we see is that when students often step back within their schools, they often step back within their own communities, not only as students, but as adults as well. They feel like they don't have power, that they don't have the ability to speak up, that they don't have the ability to affect change within their own communities and within their own libraries. And so when we can really start to unlearn that and start that at a young age, we can see that really deconstructing these hierarchies has deeply positive effects, not only for the individuals that it affects, but for the communities that they're in as well. So with all that said, we're open to any questions as we come to the end of the slides. Both of our emails are up on this slide, so if you want to reach out to either of us, we would be more than happy to field questions after the fact as well, or just connect. Ooh,
Right.
question in the chat.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read that out loud, so for the benefit of the recording. So this is a comment and question from Kim. I wonder, do you think that adults would benefit from facilitation training when beginning to dive into work like this with teens? Perhaps learning how to sit in silence, allowing teens and young adults the ability to sit and process conversation, learning how to ask questions, to draw out conversation in meeting. I know I struggled a lot with the balance between giving teens ownership over library programs and providing guidance and direction when needed. I'd love your thoughts. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Kim. I'll speak, I'll put my 2 cents in, but I'd really like to hear Connor speak about this too. So Kim, yes, is the short answer. I think I also struggle with it. I think it's very normal to struggle with that balance of power, because a lot of us, like, I know I became an educator, first formal and then informal educator, because I want to support young people and help young people, and that matters so much and to me. And so I think when we get into those spaces, not only are we so eager to support, which for us looks like sort of taking over, right? But also historically, educational spaces, whether they're libraries or schools or others, are driven by adults. So the normative hierarchy is that, right? So we know that. And I think that's how most of us, unless maybe for the few of us that went to super Montessori-like schools, were trained. So it is work for sure to do this as an adult. And it's not about like blaming adults for having more power. This is the way the world is, right? And so I definitely think facilitation training, just like we get trainings for, for content, for pedagogy, for culturally responsive stuff, for there's so much that we get trainings on. We should also, in my vantage point, get trainings on how to share space more with young people from varying backgrounds, right? I totally agree. And I can say more, but I want to let Connor speak to this too.
Absolutely. And Danielle, if you want to hop in after me to say more on that, I think we both have a lot of thoughts here. I mean, the top line thing for me is that everyone can benefit from more facilitation training. Everyone can be a better facilitator and communicator. So I'll put that out there. But I really do think that when we're talking about doing this work with teenagers and students and young people, when we're getting a student at the age of 16 who has been in public education for a significant period of time, so they're coming into your space at 16 years old. They've spent probably a decade within the public education system being told consistently that they do not have power, that they do not have a voice, and that they do not have the ability to affect change or to be heard or to make meaning, both within their schools and likely within their communities and when they go home. And so there's a lot of what we call within the team learned helplessness within that. And so what that really means for us is that students will intentionally opt out, even not necessarily when a adult is taking over the conversation, because they don't believe that they have anything to add, because they don't see themselves as someone that's very self-effective and can make meaning and change in that way. And so what we often see is that it's not just necessarily adults stepping back, but also adults stepping forward to make sure that students are supported and that they know that they're being heard when they express their thoughts, feelings, imaginations, and voices. And so when we really talk about these types of facilitation trainings, it's not just about understanding when to not speak and when to speak, or how to make sure that students can really share freely, but making sure that all students can share freely and that all students feel empowered within that space. Because oftentimes students are coming from a place of feeling disempowered and taking that as the default within their own societies and within their own lives.
Thank you, Connor. Other, I mean, I'd be curious to know, I wish we were all in the same space. How, are there, can you say, can folks type in like what role they currently have in their setting and in maybe in which capacity they work with young people?
While folks are typing in how they work with youth, I just want to plug that while we don't have specific facilitation training scheduled throughout this conference, there are several sessions that do also concern listening to youth, empowering them, how to use empathy in your connection. So if you guys check the conference schedule, you may find other topics of interest, including in room 2 this afternoon at 3, cultivating employment via teen advisory boards. I see a lot of crossover with the work that you guys have done with teen advisory boards, and also now thinking about issues that affect youth but are being decided by adults, specifically book bans. So I think there's a lot of what you guys have done that is very applicable to the public library sphere.
Totally. And that, thank you so much for that plug, Lauren, for other sessions, because there are really good facilitation guides and sort of processes out there. And I will say, Connor, and maybe you could type this in the chat or link it out, but the Kentucky Student Voice Team right now has an organization which has been around for over 10 years, emerged as part of the Pritchard Committee, which was really involved in the Educational Reform Acts, and broadly speaking supports student voice and justice for Kentucky students across in and out of schools. But one of the wings right now, so there's the research side, which Connor and I are talking about, the policy side, which looks a lot around current bills that are going through, including things like anti-CRT and book ban bills and different transgender bathroom bills on the table. But also we have a really strong journalism component. And so you can go to the website called the New EDU. And a few students recently have written explicitly about book banning and about libraries. And so those would be examples, like, for example, those would be articles, quick, ready articles that you could sort of look into and explore about, like, what are young people doing to work, with and against what's going on. And so, yeah, thank you, Connor. And it's great. Yeah, we love teen librarians for sure. So you guys have some of the most direct access, and I think there's just a lot of different ways to think about how the scholarship areas of what's often called, like, again, YAPs, youth adult partnerships, or positive youth development, how I see a lot of intersections with that work, and then with like YALSA's guidelines also, right, around which I know that a lot of you are familiar. And so, yeah, thanks, Connor, for putting that in. Yeah, that's great, Amanda. So Amanda said, I sat as a community representative for high school student council, then chairperson for early childhood, and then elementary school archery coach. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are the different ways in which, and I think a lot of us, if we probably think back on spaces in which we felt seen and heard as young people and adolescents ourselves, that also is a great way. Like, I think back to what was most meaningful for me as a young person growing up in terms of supporting my identity. That also gives me insight into the type of adult partner that I want to be today, right? And so we can intuit these things as well. But what's interesting is that when we specifically ask young people to name what those processes are, it's sort of like the research then backs up our intuition and our own experiences. And yet it's so hard to do that because of how I think public institutions are typically set up. And again, this is not to say all of them, and this is not to say that there's not amazing, more balanced power spaces out there, but just in general, the experience tends to be adults running the show and kids listening, right? And so we're trying to sort of push back a little bit on that hierarchy to say that there is incredible power and insight and innovation, I think, to be gleaned from what happens when there is intergenerational partnerships driving the design of youth-led spaces.
And I'll say within that too, I'll pick up from there, is that, Daniela, you've spoken so beautifully to intergenerational partnerships, but I also want to highlight the critical need for community partnerships writ large as well, because so often we see that so many community members, because of their experiences as youth from feeling disempowered, feel disempowered into their adulthood. And so being able to recreate these kind of partnerships within these different community spaces and being very intentional about bringing different people in and making sure that they have power and really trying to disentangle the hierarchies that pervade so many of our public institutions. I think that starts really well with youth, because that's one of the hardest groups to reach within these sort of hierarchical institutions, because oftentimes these institutions focus on credentialism, on specific areas of expertise rather than pulling on lived experience. And so when we can really shift into this sort of de-hierarchical, very flat type of organization that's very democratic for the community members that serves, if we can start doing that with young people, imagine what we could do with everyone else in our communities that we're trying to get in the door, within our own libraries, within our own schools, right? And so I think as we move forward and as we think through these things, we're really using youth adult partnerships as kind of the figurehead for how we can create better community partnerships as a whole.
Well, we've got time for more questions if anyone wants to type anything in, questions or comments. I do just want to say thank you both, Daniela and Connor, for this information. I think it's really struck a chord with our attendees, and we'll have a lot more folks who get a chance to watch this recording since we have simultaneous rooms going on. We do have a comment from Melissa. I try to get my teens to come forth with ideas for programs and activities that they want to do, and so many times they just look at me like a deer in headlights. They seem to enjoy the things that I come up with, but I would love any insight on how to maybe get them to open up.
Okay, I'll do a quick minute here and Connor. So this reminds me of actually in my LIS course right now that I'm teaching, the last week we just had was a focus on what's called interest signaling. And I am happy to share some of that work and follow up. But there's a big sort of branch of youth development work that looks at how to invite and support interest being made visible from young people to adults so that adults can then do what you're saying and make these youth-driven spaces. And it's super hard, Melissa, right? Because sometimes you have groups that are very chatty and come up with ideas. And then I would say more often than not, because of what Connor just said, because of us being sort of trained to not speak up often, it's deer in headlights. My 2 cents on this would be to start with asking them what they already do in their lives for fun or not fun, or what. So basically, sort of what their existing practices are when it comes to what they spend their time doing, and then seeing if you can then build on that and propose some ideas. So at least, even though you're building on them, and you may well already be doing this. And the other thing is to ask young people, and I find a lot of success with this with my undergraduates and sort of 16, 17-year-olds who are early, to say, what are you mad about? Like, what are you annoyed with in your maybe communities or schools or libraries? And then use that also as a jumping point in terms of what could be sort of worked on, projects that can be developed, interests that can be developed from that. I'll pass to Connor.
Daniela, I think you hit the nail on the head. And this is something that I think, well, I'm just going to echo everything you've said, I think, for the most part. But this is something within KSVT we see a lot, which is very, very challenging because we're dealing with so much learned helplessness and because we're taking so many teenagers on. when oftentimes someone's coming in at that 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old range, because they've had so much learned helplessness kind of baked in, it's very, very hard for them to feel like they have a voice, even if they have the thoughts and opinions and imaginations, because they often do, to really speak up and put themselves forward. And so what I found a lot of success with, both as a young person and as someone that's supporting a lot of young people now, as a board member and cheerleader, for myself, what's been very effective has been sort of making sure that students have the on-ramping to student voice in that way. So if we recall many, many, many slides ago, that sort of youth voice perspective from expression all the way up to leadership and activism, what we see within that sort of spectrum is that students can also walk themselves through as organizations walk themselves through. And so oftentimes the first step of student voice needs to be where students need to start, of understanding I can express myself in this space. I can be heard within this space and know that my thoughts and feelings and emotions will be understood. And so being able to push forward in that way and really understand, I think, can help get some of that opening up to happen. It's not the easiest conversation, and it is something you need to be flexible with as you vary from student to student. But I think really making sure that students do have the power to first select from some options and then give feedback on what those options are and understand and imagine what could happen when you go beyond the options provided. I think once you start building out these ideas of you can let your imagination run wild and really be idyllic and how you understand your world and your space, that's something where students can really start to feel empowered. And sometimes that does start with having the conversation of what are you currently upset about? What are you mad about? What frustrates you on a day-to-day basis? And how can we make that better?
Thanks, Connor.
Well, wonderful. Thank you guys so much for your feedback and all the questions from our participants. Before we go, I do just need to thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services. IMLS provides federal funding to KDLA through the Grants to States program, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to offer opportunities like the kayak conference. So thank you very much to IMLS. So I will be stopping the recording here, but we can hang out for a couple more minutes as we're preparing for the 11 o'clock presentations. Thank you much. Okay, recording has stopped. Thank you guys so much. It's always rough getting the conference started, so you guys did a wonderful job as our guinea pig to make sure Collaborate was working well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here. This has been a pleasure.
You guys were wonderful, and hopefully we'll have you guys back again. I really enjoyed this, so have a wonderful rest of the day unless you're joining us for some other presentations in the conference as participants.
All right.
So we'll go ahead and add.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too. All right, folks, if you're hanging out in room 2 coming up at 11, our next presenter is Shannon Crawford. Is it Barniskis? I'm sorry, I haven't.
Barniskis.
Barniskis. Okay. I wasn't sure. So congratulations, I assume, with the name change. It was a good name change.
Oh, nope. That's been my name for a long time now.
Oh, okay. I just somehow. Okay, I missed that. So sorry about that. Okay. Let's see. Let's go ahead and bring.
I did send you an email just a moment ago that I updated my files, so I'm gonna load those up if you don't mind.
Okay. So, are you familiar with?
I have used this. Yes. Let's see here. This should do it. I'm uploading it now, and then I should be able to just work from that. I just added a couple things.
Okay, yeah, no worries. I'm an inveterate tweaker of slides. I always want to tweak them into the last possible second. And so when I have to send things like a week or two in advance, it kills me.
Right, and I did, and I'm like, I can work with that if I have to, but I have some updated. So, all right. So that looks like it loaded up just fine. Um, so that looks fine to me. Well,
Good.
almost fine. No, not fine.
Yeah, it tends not to. If you've got any cool fonts, it won't translate them.
Let
The other
me,
option would be if you want to
I'll fix it
save
real
that
quick.
as you could save it as a PDF and upload
Yep.
that.
Okay, I'll
That
just do
might
that.
be
That's easiest.
if you want to preserve your design
Yeah, I might as
estate.
well. So it's interesting. Let me upload that then. Doop, doop, doop. Doop, doop. All right. I wish I had seen Daniela's earlier talk with Connor and so forth. I just came in at the very end, and
We recorded
incredible
it,
work.
so eventually it will be on YouTube. But yeah, it was a really good presentation. And yours, as Daniela said, great segue into your presentation. There's a lot of stuff about empowerment, inclusivity, listening to you, being empathetic with you. So it seems to be
Yes.
A theme throughout our conference.
Yes, definitely. And in such an important one. So it's not like I need to tell librarians to do that. They already know. But
you do, but sometimes
it helps to be reminded sometimes.
Yeah. Specific steps are great, trying to implement that. And sometimes you've got to convince, it's not necessarily the youth services librarian, but folks higher up, the director, the library boards sometimes. So no, it's all good. And plus, humans forget things. We all need reminders. It's not like, oh, cool, I learned that information, I'm good for life. I forget things, so repetition is great.
So I see we have several people in here already. This is great. I'm really excited. Hey, y'all.
Yeah, we should have more rolling in because I think some sessions are running longer than others.
Yeah.
But since these are recorded, we tend to get a lot of post views because we've got 3 rooms running simultaneously.
Yeah.
So we may get some folks who are coming over from other rooms.
So Lauren, you're the tech coordinator, right? We met last fall, I think.
Potentially.
When I came to KDLA, you're the one who gave me the list of all the maker spaces in the state and so forth.
Oh, yes, the ones I had at that time. That list is not well maintained, but I was glad to provide that.
I would love to talk to you again about that because my next study I'm looking at, I talked to a couple people actually at KPLA or KDLA, KPLA, I think it was that one.
KPLA, the Kentucky Public Library Association.
Right, that one I think is the one, not the just KLA. Who were talking about either their maker spaces or another maker space they knew about in the state was what they called like it failed or it didn't work out. And my next study is on that. So I would love to pick your brain if you know any of those places that are perceiving that something's just not working. I would love to talk to those people.
Right offhand, I'm not sure, but I think if you are looking for study participants, we can share that on all of our KDLA listservs, and I'm sure folks will be glad to respond.
Great.
Because mostly I hear that things are going well, or I just haven't had an update
Right.
since they've started it.
Yeah, and most of the time it does seem that way, but every once in a while you get these cases where something's just not jibing. And so I wanna work with those people and figure it out
Yeah,
together.
that would be
So
great.
yeah.
And would you be interested in feedback from libraries in other states?
Oh,
Because
absolutely. Yes. Yes.
because I'm a member of a state library technology consulting group that's hosted
Mm.
by COSLA, the chief officers of state library agencies. So they have listservs for various state library staff. So I can reach out to folks in that community. And also, there's a lot of crossover between people who do E-rate like I do and other technology consulting. So I can also share it on our state E-rate coordinator listserv to try to get a wider base of responses. I can tell this is going to be a popular topic as people are piling in. It's always exciting.
Yeah, sorry, I lost connection, I think, there for a second, but I would love to talk to you about that, sending it out to listservs that you know of, because I will be sending it to various listservs that I know of as well. But it'd be good to get the word out. Awesome.
Yeah, no, we can definitely do that.
So it seems like the UK connection is not solid, so that's great. I'm wired in my office on campus, hardwired to the internet, and I just dropped for a second. So hopefully
Well,
we'll
maybe like
be kind
Daniela,
to
you
me.
should have gone to a coffee shop. Although the very beginning of the presentation, there's a lot of dogs barking.
That's funny. That's funny.
Okay, we got about 2 minutes to start time, and I'll make some quick announcements at the beginning. I'll start the recording and just briefly say, like, here's our next presenter, and then I'll pass it off to you.
Okay, great.
Oh, and Shannon, do you want to take questions as they come up throughout, or do you want to hold them?
I would actually really like to hold them to the end. I have a big section blocked out for discussion. So assuming I do this as I practiced it, my talk should be less than 30 minutes and then have a discussion period. But I'd like to just kind of get through it. If there are questions, people could type them in the chat and then we'll make sure to like get to them so they
Yes.
don't forget them.
Exactly. And then I'll read the questions out loud for the benefit of the recording, because the recording itself is just going to show the slides. It's not going to have
Right.
your camera. It's not going to show the chat field. So
Okay.
we're at 11 o'clock. So welcome everyone to this room. Before we start the recording, just a reminder in case you've not used Blackboard Collaborate, and anytime if you have technical issues, I'll be glad to help. I'm Lauren Abner, the technology consultant here at KDLA. To open the Collaborate panel, click on the purple arrows at the lower right-hand corner of your browser, and then at the bottom, click on the chat bubble. You can chat directly to me, or you can ask questions to the group. You're welcome to add questions to the chat throughout, but we're going to hold those until we get to the end of Shannon's presentation. All right, let me get this recording